Good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's April 20th, 2022, and please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. No invocation this morning. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Staff, you can introduce the first case.
Commissioners, good morning. My name is Dirk Danley with the Zoning Division. There's 4 cases before you today. The first of which will be presented by Pete Blackwell. There will be 2 zoning cases and 2 comp plan cases.
Okay.
Good morning. For the record, Peter Blackwell with Lee County Zoning. Our first case today is REZ 2021-00019, Luckett Landing. The request to rezone 5.88 acres of a 16.56 acre parcel from general commercial to highway commercial. Hold on a second here. Let me give you a nice view there. The property is located in the northwest corner of the intersection at Luckett Road and I-75. This parcel may be familiar to some of you. Back in February, there was a CPA case that adjusted the future land use category from industrial to industrial interchange in anticipation of this rezoning. The hearing examiner's recommendation was for approval, and there were no participants of record on this case.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for staff at this time? No questions for staff. Would the applicant wish to address the board? Steve, are you here?
Steve Hartzell for the record. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise,
Any questions for the applicant? If not, we have no participants of record. We'll come back to the board for a motion.
I'll move approval, Mr. Chairman, of the hearing
second it.
examiner recommendation.
We have one motion. We have a second by Commissioner Wang. Any other discussion? Any objection? No objection. Motion carries. Next case.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Doty. I'm in the zoning section here at Lee County. This is a request for 2600 Northeast Pine Island Road, commercial plan development. It's a request to rezone agricultural and single-family zone parcels to commercial plan development to allow for a maximum of 575,000 square feet of open storage use. The hearing examiner did recommend approval. Property is located in North Fort Myers Planning Community, just outside the city of Cape Coral's boundaries. Just as a quick note on the master concept plan, in the southeast corner of the property, there's 4.19 acres of restoration area. This is to address some code violations, and that is part of a condition of the hearing examiner's recommendation. Current zoning was split between RS1 and AG2, predominantly within the commercial future land use, with portions within uplands and wetland future land use in the southeast corner. And it is located within the mixed use overlay. There were no participants of record on this request, and as I'd said, the hearing examiner did recommend approval. If you have any questions, I'm happy.
Thank you. We'll come back to the board for any questions for staff.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just real quick while you're up there, can you just outline kind of the screening and like buffering, if any is necessary?
Yes, sir. So at the southeast portion of the property, where there's a mark and a red line, that's buffering to the east and southeast for the residents there. And then there's buffering consistent with the code requirements on the western and southern borders.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Would the applicant wish to address the board? Brian?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Brian Farrar, BCF Management Group for the client. We're in concurrence with the staff and hearing examiner's recommendation, and our presentation is here, but it's on the staff report. And if you have any questions for the entitlement team, we're happy to answer them.
Great. Any questions for the applicant? You know, we have no participants as the record to speak as usual, and we'll come back to the board for a motion.
I'll move approval.
second.
We have a motion. We have a second, Commissioner Sandelli. Any other discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Thank you. Next case. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. The next two cases will be CPA cases. The first one is for Owl Creek. This is two privately initiated amendments, CPA 2020-04 and CPA 2020-05. These are text and map amendments. This request is really broken up into three separate parts. There is the change to the way the wetland density is calculated in the rural future land use category. It has county-wide applicability. There is a creation of rare and unique incentives for the North Olga Community Plan area. This would be applicable to the rural areas, the rural future land use category in the North Olga Community Plan area. And then finally, there is a map amendment to add the subject property to the future water service area. And that will ultimately be to serve a residential development that's being proposed on the property concurrently. The wetlands density calculation, the proposed wetland density calculation for wetlands would make the way we treat wetland density consistent with other categories in the LEED plan, including intensive development, general interchange, central urban, suboutline suburban, and a whole host of other community or future land use categories. So this would be consistent with the treatment of those wetlands and those other categories. Staff does support this. The rare and unique density incentive, the proposed amendments are consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies within the Northeast Lee County and North Olga Community Plan area by incentivizing the use of cluster development with large contiguous tracts of open space, contributing to unique development of rural character, heritage, and natural resource of the North Olga Community Plan area. This is consistent with objectives 27.1 and policy 27.1.1 in the Northeast Lee County Community Plan area, policy 27.2.1, objective 27.2, also within the Northeast Lee County Community Plan area, and it's consistent with policy 29.2.1 within the North Olga Community Plan area. And those are generally for the preservation of large areas to preserve the community character. The final amendment is the amendment to the future water service area. The applicant has requested to add the property to LCU's future water service area to be able to provide water service. While it's not an amendment on this map, the applicant is proposing to use FGUA for connection to sewer in the future, but that's not an amendment that shows up in the LEED plan. The conclusions for these amendments are the proposed amendments incentivize clustering of residential development. They protect large areas of open space, natural resources, unique habitats, and the rural aesthetic qualities consistent with Goal 27 and 29 of the LEED plan. The proposed amendments incentivize preservation of wetlands adjacent to uplands in the rural future land use category, consistent with the county's overall wetland protection policies. The proposed amendments preserve the distinction between future non-urban and suburban areas consistent with the vision of the LEED plan. And the proposed amendments to Map 4A, which is the future water service area, help to ensure groundwater levels will be maintained at or above existing levels. Both staff and the LPA have recommended the BOCC transmit the proposed amendments as shown in Attachment 1. The applicant is here to kind of go over the project in a little bit more detail, and then I'll turn it over to them.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff at this time? No? Okay, would the applicant wish to address the board briefly?
Good morning, Mr.
Russell.
Chairman, members of the board. For your record, I'm Russell Schropp with the Henderson Franklin firm, here today on behalf of D.R. Horton, who is the contract purchaser of the subject property. This is a transmittal hearing for several proposed plan amendments to the LEED plan, which, as you know, means that your action today here is not final. The request is here simply to transmit the plan amendment to the state for review. I'm here today with my partner, Richard Aiken, and as well as the project's consulting team that is listed on this slide. I have about a 5 or 10 minute presentation just to go over some of the things that staff have already hit upon. Stacy Hewitt is here, and if you'd like to see how the plan amendments would be applied to the subject property, we're happy to do that, but we have a concurrent rezoning that will come back to you at a later date, and it might be more appropriate to take that up at that time, but whatever your pleasure is, we're here to do. Brandon went over the 3 amendments that were proposed. Basically, they're summarized on this slide, and the actual text and map amendments were included in the back of materials. New policy 29.2.4 would provide an incentive for increased density to preserve rare and unique upland habitat within the North Olga community, which is where these habitats exist. As noted in the staff report, rare and unique upland habitat is indigenous to Northeast Lee County and includes such things as live oak hammock and cabbage palm hammock, which are present on the subject property that our client has under contract. Protection of these upland habitats has been more difficult because they are easier to develop than wetlands and don't require mitigation. This will afford some protection for rare and unique upland habitat through a density incentive. To utilize this policy and the incentive, a plan development would be required, plan development rezoning would be required, and during the PD process, the application would be reviewed to demonstrate the achievement of several criteria, including 60% open space on the subject property, rare and unique upland preservation or restoration, the clustering of residential uses, and other criteria. This is not a new concept to the LEAP plan. It's been used elsewhere in the county, as you know, in your environmental enhancement overlay district down in Southeast Lee County, and it was also used to a certain extent when you did the plan amendment for the Babcock project. This is just a different format and a different area of protection. The second text amendment that's before you today is the changes to provide an incentive for preserving wetlands and a corresponding disincentive for impacting wetlands that are adjacent to uplands that are in the rural land use classification. As Brandon indicated, this is presently being done in other land use classifications. It's been an evolutionary process through your LEAP plan through the last 30 years. The last change was made in 2010, I believe, to apply it to uplands adjacent to other land use classifications. This just extends the protection and the incentive to the rural classification. And the third amendment is a simple map amendment to increase or to add the subject property to the map 4A of the LEAP plan, which would facilitate the provision of central water and eliminate the need to do individual wells in shallow aquifers there. There is a concurrent rezoning to residential plan development pending for the property, and would apply these plan amendments to the subject property. If the plan amendments are transmitted today, the RPD would be reviewed through your normal process through the hearing examiner and come back to you along with this plan amendment for potential adoption at a later date. Staff has recommended transmittal of these amendments, as has the local planning agency. At the LPA, there was one dissent to the text amendment for rare and unique upland preservation from the chairman, Mr. Inc. I have to admit that during the presentation at the LPA, I did not quite understand Mr. Inc.'s concern until the very end of the presentation, and when he suggested a way to address his concern, and that's shown in the underlined and bold-faced addition to this plan amendment there. It looks like a fairly innocuous or simple addition, but in reality what it does is very significant in that it increases or improves the internal consistency of the LEAP plan with this plan amendment. So it's a very good addition that I think Mr. Inc. had or suggested at the LPA hearing. So I think both the applicant and the staff would encourage you to include this language in the language that's being transmitted to the state. That's the basic background of the plan amendments that I wanted to cover. Stacy is here if you'd like to go through application of these policies to the subject property, or we can wait till the rezoning and go through that at that point in time, whatever your pleasure is.
Great, thank you. Any questions from staff for the
Can you
applicant?
go back to the last slide real quick, Mr. Schropp? So if we wanted to pass the motion today, make a motion today to pass this, would we need to amend our motion to include that language that's underlined there?
I don't believe so. I think that's included in the staff.
Staff recommendation.
Report. It's not, we didn't add it, staff added it to the staff report.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Call for public comment. Any public comment on this transmittal hearing? Please come forward. Go to state your name, Steve, for the record, and you get to utilize your public comment now. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Brodkin. I'm here representing the concerned citizens of Bayshore community and also Women for a Better Lee. We oppose the transmittal of the Owl Creek text amendment for the following reasons. From the first Lee plan, the rural land use category allowed for a maximum of 1 dwelling unit per acre with no bonus density. Recently, there's been a move to circumvent the rural land use density restrictions. In some cases, it may be appropriate to add density in urban land use categories, but if we're to maintain a distinction between urban, suburban, and rural areas, additional density for rural land use areas should not be allowed. The text amendment to policy 124.1.1 would allow the transfer of density from preserved wetlands within the rural land use category to be 1 dwelling unit per acre instead of the current 1 dwelling unit per 20 acres. This would create a huge increase in density for rural development. Also, the proposed policy 29.2.4 would allow an additional 1 dwelling unit per acre for each of created, for each acre of created, preserved, and/or restored indigenous, rare, and unique upland habitats. They're already allowed 1 dwelling unit per acre for the upland, so they get to count the same acreage twice. Once is density transferred from the preserved uplands, and the same acreage being counted again as 1 dwelling unit per acre for rare and unique upland habitat. So they actually get 2 units per acre for preserved uplands, creating an additional huge density increase. The developer is already required to preserve flowways, wetlands, and maintain open space without these text amendments. Without the text amendments, the applicant would be allowed a maximum of 223 dwelling units, assuming consistency with the rest of the Lee plan, which we believe they are not. The text amendments, if adopted and applied to this development, would allow an additional 157 dwelling units for a total of 380 dwelling units, which is a 70% increase in density for a rural area. Almost all of the property lies within the coastal high hazard flood zone, and all of the property lies within Category 1 storm surge zone. In addition to, according to a study paid for by Lee County, almost all of the property lies within existing and future floodplain map for stormwater flooding that comes down Owl and Trout Creeks. Lee Plan Policy 5.1.2 states, prohibit residential development where physical constraints or hazards exist, or require the density and design to be adjusted accordingly. Such constraints or hazards include, but are not limited to, flood, storm, hurricane hazards, and then some other things are listed, but also says other characteristics that may endanger the residential community. Increasing the residential density is not consistent with prohibiting or adjusting the density and design according for areas for flood-prone areas and hurricane hazards as stated in Policy 5.1.2. The applicant has not shown consistency with Policy 5.1.2, which unnecessarily increases the number of people who will be in danger, need to evacuate, and not stay in place during hurricane or other flooding events.
I'm sorry, your 3 minutes are up, so.
Okay, and I haven't talked about nutrient runoff from the development or traffic congestion, but those are other issues to be considered.
Thank you, Steve. Any other public comment on this transmittal hearing? Okay, we'll come back to the board for motion.
I'll make a motion to transmit.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Any other discussion? Any objections? One objection, Commissioner Mann. That motion carries 4-1. Thank you. Next case. Thank you.
Final case of the day is an adoption hearing. This is for the Wellfield Protection Zone update. This was transmitted by the board a few months ago. The reason for this request is to maintain consistency with Florida statutes 163, 3177, and 163, 3177, 6A, 1F. So statutes require that the board identify codes of influence for the Wellfield Protection Ordinance. We've done that. We're proposing some updates based on data and analysis that was completed by our Natural Resources Department. That's provided as an attachment to the staff report. As I said, this has been previously transmitted by the Board of County Commissioners. It was transmitted on January 19th, 2022. It was reviewed by the state reviewing agencies. Lee County received no objections or comments concerning the proposed amendments, and staff recommends the BOCC adopt the amendments as provided in attachment 1.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this time? Okay. Thank you for staff for all your work on this, by the way. Will public comment on this item? Any public comment? We'll close public comment, come back to the board for a motion.
I'll move the item.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Mr. Hammond, any other discussion? Any objection? No objection, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.